Good afternoon, everybody. It's always kind of somebody to clap before I've said anything. It shows real faith, which I'm very grateful for. This is the slot which we call in the UK the graveyard slot. Just after lunch, and so I'm grateful to the organisers for giving me this particular privilege this afternoon. I'm Andy Lloyd, I'm UK based. Just to be really clear, Brexit wasn't my idea. And in July this year, I celebrated 40 years of working with children and families. I walked into a children's home for my first duty 40 years ago this July. So looking around, that's longer than some of you have been alive. I don't know how I feel about that. In my career, I've had the privilege of working in practice. I'm a social worker. I've worked in family support in a whole number of different ways, with young people involved in very serious crime, with families who were really struggling, with child protection services. I've worked in the university sector and in the academy for a number of years, heading up at one point a department in one of the universities in Leeds. And I've also been involved more recently, but also some time ago, in policy development. So I've had a real privilege of spending time doing all sorts of fascinating stuff. But the whole of my career has been involved with children, families, family support, and how we can get it right. And I sat here this morning feeling both privileged and slightly intimidated by the enormous brains on show. And it's great that you're here. And it's great that you're doing your research. And it's great that we're here to share your research and learn from each other. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. I come from the north of England, from Yorkshire. If you've ever been to the United Kingdom, we call Yorkshire God's own county. And it's about 200 miles away from a small city in the south of England that people call London. Okay. Researchers matter. You matter. Just to be really clear, I should have said that I'm trying to talk to you about how we can make sure that your research impacts children and families, how you can engage with policymakers and practitioners. You matter. Why do you matter? Well, first of all, because family support is a value-led piece of work. And I want to really emphasise that idea of value-led. You're not researching a motor car. You're not researching a piece of rock. Now, all of that's really important, but it's not about values. But what you do and what your career is involved with is the values of how do we best work with children and their families. Never forget what you're doing. In the days when you're knee-deep in data, when the days when you're crying over the next chapter of your PhD, and when you've got your PhD, your next book, or your next lecture, or your next whatever, never forget that we're doing this because we want the best outcomes for children and their families. Okay. The second reason that it's important is that family support is a relatively young concept. One of my rather more niche, or some would say boring, areas of research is UK-based Victorian philanthropy. Okay? You've all just nodded off. It's really interesting. But that's only 150 years ago. I'm talking about the period from about 1834 to about 1895. Many of us remember that time. That was a joke. I'll give up. But it's a very young profession. It's a very young profession, and we need to learn. I need to learn from you, because the poster presentations we've heard this morning and the poster presentations that we'll be hearing on the next 2 days are things that really matter. They matter to us because we're interested. They matter to us because they're fascinating, and there was some really, really good stuff there. But you know what? They matter more if they impact children and families. They matter more if what you've discovered changes the life of a child. And it's my job within EurofamNet, mine and my colleagues' job, to remind my academic colleagues, of whom I have enormous respect, I should say, that that's why we're all here. And I'll talk about that again. But we need the best research, and there needs to be a direct link between your research, people who make policy, and people who deliver practice. Practitioners and policymakers matter. Practitioners work directly with children and families. The last 2.5 years has been an extraordinary journey for your practitioner colleagues, who were used to meeting families every day of the week, in centres, in their home, on the street. And then they had to learn really quickly how to offer support, family support, over online. And who missed out on that? The most marginalised. The families where they hadn't got the digital device. They couldn't afford access to the internet. Where governments were trying their best, but not always succeeding in providing this equipment for those who are most in need. Never forget that it's the most marginalised that miss out the most on the best information. Families are often struggling in conditions of adversity. Okay? Families are often struggling in conditions of adversity. Policymakers work with politicians. Day in, day out, talking to politicians, trying to shape policy, trying to do things differently, trying to make different things happen. And however you view the political sphere in your home country and globally and Europe-wide, we need to make sure that we're good, effective at communicating with our politicians, because they're the one that can unlock the resources to make the difference to children and families that we're working with. And these people, the policymakers and the practitioners, are the direct link between your research and a child a kilometre away from here who really needs to have some support, and their parents really need to have some support. One of the things that I do, and I remind myself very often, is I wake up in my privileged house, warm or cool, depending on the weather. I'm from Britain. Cool. Well-fed, well-clothed, with a car, with money. And I think, a mile away from here, a mother has woken up this morning with half a box of cereal, half a litre of milk, and no money, and 3 children. We need to get to remind ourselves all the time of the reality of what you're doing. And we need to link together. Children and parents matter. The vast majority of parents want the best for their children. There's very good research that suggests that of all the referrals to child protective services, to social services, however you describe it in your country, a flatline 10% are the really nasty things, the broken bones, the chronic neglect, the sexual abuse. 90% of those referrals are parents who are parenting in conditions of adversity, who are struggling to get it right. They want to get it right, but they're struggling. It might be because of financial pressures. It might be because of mental ill health. It might be because of substance misuse. It might be because of domestic abuse. But these are people who are not deliberately waking up this morning thinking, I'm going to hurt my child. These are people who, because of conditions of adversity, struggle to parent well. And we need all of your brains, all of your wisdom, all of your knowledge to help us and help those parents and therefore help those children. And the struggle has increased, and that's become very clear through the COVID pandemic. If there's a child with a disability in the house, physical or educational disability in the house, that struggle becomes harder. So we can't lose sight of the importance of parents and families. And parents want to know what's best. I have 3 children, aged 30, 28 and 26. They have all left home. I love them very much and I'm enormously proud of them. But there were times as a father, with all the privilege that I have, when I thought, I don't know what the right thing to do is. I have no idea. I have enormous sympathy with parents when we go around a supermarket and there's a 2-year-old lying on the floor in the freezer section, making it clear that they weren't going to move. Be sorry for them. Be kind to them. Because there's a parent somewhere saying, I haven't any idea now what to do. Parenting is hard. It's a great joy and a great privilege, by the way. I don't want to put you off, but it's also pretty tough stuff. Okay. Families want to know what's best. And privileged families go and buy books. And families who can't afford to buy books or don't understand the books that they're buying need us to help. You've seen this before. But this is so important. This is a very, very, very important slide. And if you listen to nothing else from me today, and you might not, please look at this. And let me just be really clear. If we have research and policy, but no practice, so if you find out some really important stuff and you talk to a policymaker and they say, great, thank you very much for telling me, no child will benefit. No child will benefit. You'll benefit, you've got your PhD. The policymakers will benefit, they've got a beautiful document. The child over there who needs it is not impacted. If you have research and practice with no policy, there's isolated benefits for children. The people that know. But there's no broad policy to make this universal. And so the people who are privileged to know you will say, I know something, that's really good. I'll go and do that with 13 children. In Leeds, there are 78,000 children. 13 children doesn't make a difference. Most dangerous of all, and I speak to my profession here, is policy and practice with no research, where people like me just make up good ideas without any idea whether it's going to make any difference, whether it works, whether it's going to help. What are the dangers? What are the unintended consequences? And suddenly, we see where the triangle, or it's not, I keep on calling it a triangle. I do call it a triangle, but it isn't. It's a Venn diagram, but it started life as a triangle about 15 years ago. We need to have all three. We need to have this dialogue. You, me, and my colleagues, and your colleagues, talking all the time, sharing, and getting over the fact that we think we do things differently. And just at the bottom there, the rights of children and their families. The rights of children and their families. Who is the expert on a child? Almost always the parent. Almost always the primary carer. And if just to do a little test, think of a child that you know, maybe a child under 5 that you know, might be yours, might be a cousin, might be a sibling, might be whoever. Friend's child. What's their favourite soft toy? What's their favourite food? What are they like when they first wake up in the morning? How does bedtime work for them? Ask those 4 questions. It isn't professionals that know the answer. It isn't researchers that know the answer. It's parents. They're the experts. That's why we need to work in partnership together. It isn't that complicated, but it's really important. And it's really important because we want happy, healthy, strong, and resilient families. And we want that for all sorts of reasons. We want that because that's good for children. And for those of us that have a career in what we do, that's just a straightforward answer. But what about the economists? Well, it makes perfect sense to have strong, happy, healthy, and resilient families from an economic point of view. Because if you have families who are flourishing and doing well and don't need support of other services, it's cheaper. No, that's not an argument that I particularly warm to. But if you're talking to politicians and policymakers, it's a very useful argument. As you grow older, I'll change that. As I grow older, I'm increasingly aware that I need competent, kind, well-functioning young people and young adults to look after me when I get too old to look after myself tomorrow. That was another joke. I'll tell you if I'm telling a joke. I'll warn you beforehand. All right. Economically, socially, we need children to grow up to become well-functioning, well-rounded, socially competent young adults who contribute really importantly to the economy, the local economy. And incidentally, and this is something that I'll not touch on too much, that's why being a child-friendly city, a child-friendly municipality, a child-friendly area is so important. Not because we want to be all cuddly and kind to kids, because if you're not a child-friendly area, as soon as they can, they will leave. And in the UK, around the coast, not far from where I live, on the coast of the east coast of Yorkshire, there are towns and cities which are now dying, literally, because we've not made it a pleasant place for young people to live. And so they've moved. And now they're trying desperately to attract people back. And young parents and young people are saying, why would we come back? You don't like us. So that's why the policy work is so important. We have to see this as a whole team effort. So what's the issue? The reason that I've been asked to talk today, I think, is because we're not speaking clearly enough to each other. We don't always get it right. That doesn't mean we never get it right, by the way, but it means that sometimes we don't get it right. And we sit being frustrated with the other side rather than getting it right. Policymakers and practitioners sometimes don't feel that they have time to read long, complex, clever academic papers. I don't. And I wish I had, by the way, but I haven't. In fact, I have a shelf in my office at home, and it's labelled Papers I Will Never Read. And I print them out and I put it, because it makes me feel better. And every now and then I dip into it, and I read a couple. But there's probably 50. And I'm sorry if one of them is yours. I really am, genuinely. I'm sure it's brilliant. But I don't have time. But to pick up the top point that I missed out, too often researchers and policymakers and practitioners, the third point, researchers sometimes feel that there isn't a need to engage without outside academia. Your research is your end goal. Now, let me say really clearly, I understand that. I understand that when you're on a PhD program, your research is your end goal. That's the whole of your life. You live it, you sleep it, you eat it, you breathe it. I understand that. But what I'm trying to do and trying to encourage you to do is lift your eyes. At least lift your eyes just briefly, every now and then. And remember that clever research that doesn't go anywhere, that no one knows about, is going to sit on my paper that I will never read shelf. And it will not make any difference to children and their families. We don't always understand each other. We just don't always understand each other. So language matters. How we communicate matters. It is a real blessing for me that this conference is spoken in English. Because however poor your English is a lot better than my whatever your language is. And I'm sorry about that. But it's true. But I'm speaking in English. I'm speaking, I hope, relatively clearly. But what I'm going to do now is show you some English. That is the dialect in the area that I grew up in. Anybody want to go at it? Cos kick-a-bow again a woe, yed it back and bossed it. Sorry?
Sounds like only fools and horses.
No. Good idea. Can you kick a ball against a wall, head it back and burst it? Hear all, see all, say nout. Eat all, sup all, pay nout. And if that ever does nout out for nout, I'll just do it for the sen. Yes? Go on. You getting there? This is just me being silly, by the way. This is a Yorkshire saying. Hear everything, see everything, say nothing. Eat everything, drink everything, pay nothing. And if you ever do anything for nothing, always do it for yourself. That is genuinely a Yorkshire attitude. All right? We're all lovely people, really. That's silly. That's me just being daft after lunch. It makes the point. We can be speaking the same language and not understand each other. Not understand what it is that we're really trying to say. And I have had meetings between policymakers, practitioners, and academics, and I've had to translate, interpret what people are saying. Because you can talk about research methodology or quantitative and qualitative research methods or all of that stuff, and my colleagues who are working with families will say, "What do you mean? What do you mean?" But then my colleagues who do family support will start talking about universal credit or benefit rates. And my academic colleagues say, "We don't really understand what that is." No, because we need to talk to each other. We each have skills, we all have skills, and we need to share those skills with each other. We can all work together. And we have to all work together. And just to go back to that, please don't lose sight of this. It is in the EurofamNet core document, foundation document. And it is something that we come back to. But please don't lose sight of that, because it's so very important. We need all three groups of people if we're going to make this work. And when I say we're going to make this work, I mean we're going to change the lives of a child. We're going to change the well-being of a family. We need all three: policymakers, researchers, and practitioners. We need to set up a constant dialogue between these three. A constant dialogue. All the time, always. And we need to recognise that language gets in the way and we can misunderstand each other. And when we misunderstand each other, it's our job to explain what we mean. If somebody says, "I don't know what you mean," it's your job to explain, in whatever capacity you do this work. So how do we do it? I want to encourage you, and I want to encourage you today, to start making contact, if you haven't already done so, with your local policymakers and your local practitioners. And to do that intentionally. Don't do it anecdotally. You happen to be at a party and you bumped into somebody who does family support and say, "I've sorted that, Andy. I'm now in dialogue with my practitioner colleagues." Do it intentionally. Invite them to come and see you. Or even better, invite yourself to go and see them. Just as academics meet together regularly, policymakers do and practitioners do. Find out when and say, "I'd love to come and talk to you about what I'm doing at the moment." And if they say no thank you, go and find somebody else to talk to. But you make a decision that as an academic, as a researcher, as a knowledgeable, skilled, intelligent, brainy, let's face it, person with something to tell us, make it your business to tell us, not to tell each other. Tell each other by all means, by the way, but tell the policymakers and the practitioners too. Meet with them regularly and intentionally. And let me focus on the word intentionally. Do it deliberately. Do it as part of your career plan. Do it as part of your career ambition. And I have had links with colleagues, some of whom are in this room, for decades. Decades. Proper academics, proper brainy people. Not like me. But they share stuff with me and I share stuff with them. And I really appreciate it. But share your research at all stages, by the way. Don't make it look beautiful and polish it and say, "Look at this." They'll be impressed. But what if you share it with them when you've got a problem to overcome? when you're not quite sure how to do it. I was talking to a colleague in one of the universities in my home city, and they were saying that they wanted to do some research into Southeast Asian families living in the area who had a child with a disability. And they were saying, we just can't get anybody to talk to us. And I said, well, why haven't you come and spoken to me? Because the city council that I work for worked with hundreds of those families. Oh, we didn't think of that. Well, you're very, very bright, but you're not very clever. We need to talk to each other. Share your research. And then come to me and say, Andy, what's the big struggle? What's the big struggle that you as a practitioner, that you as a policymaker, what's the big struggle that you're facing at the moment? Children, adolescents, but younger children, and mental health. Adolescence and suicidal ideation. Big, big issue. What can you tell me about that? Or whatever. As a practitioner, as a policymaker, I know what the big issues are in my area. Go and find out. Because you might know something. And without wanting to be too dramatic too dramatic about this, you might save the life of a child, which is well worth a career. When you start a new research program, always ask yourself, is this going to make the difference to the life of a child? Are you doing research that will make a difference to the life of a child? If the answer is yes, you do it. If the answer is no, ask why. Why are you doing research into family support that isn't going to change the life of a child? Now, there might be a very good reason, but I'm not sure I can think of it. And we can have a bit of a chat about that in a minute, if you'd like. Share your research outcomes with your practice and policy colleagues at all stages, and repeat throughout your career. You've got a long career ahead of you, an illustrious career ahead of you. You're going to be brilliant, brilliant people in academia. And I'm not being flippant. I'm not being funny. That's true. I've heard what you say this morning. Well, 6 of you. I'm sure the rest of you are equally as brilliant. But you can change the lives of children and families if we work together really well. Do it throughout your whole career. You see, it's all about relationships. I can't tell you how long it took me to get that picture. Hours in a supermarket. We need to take seriously the policy and practice and research diagram. We really do. That's my key message for today. We need to see ourselves as partners in a value-led profession. When you publish, you have 2 audiences. The academic audience and the policy and practice audience. And they speak different languages. And maybe, just to help the number of papers on my bookshelf, perhaps as part of your discipline, you could write an accessible 2 or 3 page briefing about your life's work. And I know that will hurt. How can I possibly tell you everything in 2 pages, Andy? Well, that's what policymakers and practitioners do all the time. Because I have to go to politicians and say, here's a 198-page document that's been published by the clever person of Cleverland. And they say, well, I'm not going to read that. Yes, here's a 1-page summary. It doesn't tell you everything, but it gives you the headlines. If you can do that for me, I can get your research out to colleagues around the sector. So, Thank you very much indeed. I think I've given myself enough time to answer some questions. Please argue with me. Please disagree with me. Please talk to me. And if you don't, I'll just tell you some jokes. Yes, you, and then...
Thank you, Professor Thomas. This is a very interesting speech, the motivational one. I felt as I was in a TED Talk conference. And thank you for inspiring us to believe in our in what we are doing. And that the research, the young researchers matters in a society.
Absolutely.
I like when you said about the resilience in family, because nowadays we face challenges and we should know how to be resilient in a society with pandemics, with wars, because I come from next to Ukraine, so
Yes.
so that's why I'm thinking about the challenges of our nowadays. And yeah, I would like to hear more about how to be resilient in these days with so very the days are very different from one to the next day. So how to be resilient, how to learn or how to manage
Yep.
situations.
Thank you. So this is a question about resilience. How do you grow or be resilient? There's a danger in the word resilient, because we can easily turn it into something that if you're not resilient, it's your fault. You have failed. And that's not true. That's not true. We build resilience by being faced with a difficulty and coming through that difficulty. As I said to you, I've got 3 children. Every now and then my telephone rings, my mobile rings. It's normally late at night, okay? And either, well, it's one of 3 things. Very, very rarely is one of my children wanting to say, "Hello, Dad, how are you doing?" They don't really care. The second one is, "Can you send me some money?" All right? Because they know that I'm soft, and of course I will. And thirdly, they say, "I've got a flat tire." Well, you're 100 miles away from me and I'm in bed. What would you like me to do about that? And then I help them change a flat tire over the phone. And they often video call me and say, "Do you mean this bit?" "Yeah, well, that's the tire." Yeah. We're getting in the right area. Okay? The point I'm making is this. If my children are struggling in a condition of adversity, they have someone to ring up. And that's what family support is. We teach people who, for whatever reason, are struggling with whatever it is, and we give them opportunity to develop solutions. We don't charge around the place doing it for them. We help them think through their own response. We help them think through their own result. So that was a bit of a flippant response. In a war-torn country, in a country which is next to a war-torn country, we've got the same thing. Every family in our country needs somebody to ring up. Every child, every young person needs to have somebody to ring up. So how do I do this? But we also need to be able to say, if you're struggling, come and talk to us. And this is where policymakers are so important, because if I ring up and say I'm struggling, and the State Protective Services say, right, we'll remove your child, no one's going to ring up. So we have to create the conditions where you're allowed to ring up, and then somebody will come and offer you support. So that's where research policy practice has to really come into focus. You tell us what is the best research, Our policymakers will turn it into state policy, and our practitioners will deliver it on the ground. Resilience is not being resilient isn't somebody's personal failing, it's a failing of the state. And we need to start working out together how we can work towards a more resilient society. I hope that helps a little bit. Happy to have another conversation with you.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for your presentation speech. It's very interesting. Well, you said something about that your research ends when it's being published,
Uh-huh.
for example, and often that is the case because that's also for a researcher, that is what you're supposed to do. If you write your research, you have to publish your research, and you have that's what you have the time for to do. So you mentioned something about the shelf of papers that you have to read. Well, I have a shelf of information and papers that I have to rewrite into readable
Yes.
reports for example, policymakers. So how do you think we could change that? That we also, as researchers, get more time or more help in writing our results?
Oh, gosh. Lots and lots of different answers. Let me ask you a question. Do you believe in your research?
Well, sometimes I do, sometimes I actually think, how is this going to help children? I sometimes do think that.
Well, right, okay, two things then. First of all, go and talk to somebody like me and describe in more detail what you're doing. And if between us we can't work out how it's going to help a child, we might have a difficulty, but I bet you we can. I bet you we can, because your research will be important. I suppose that what I would say after 40 years, and it is and it's been a great career, but it's been a tough career, is if you want to be working in this field, be ready for the hard times as well as the easy times. Some days you think, oh, this is great. And some times you go into a family and you think, this is the hardest thing I've ever had to do. This is really complex stuff. And I don't know what the answer is. And that's when I need to be able to ring you up and say, will you help me? Because I don't know, but you do, because you've read all those clever books and papers. Somebody somewhere must have an idea. And that's why the community, the family support community, and that's why EurofamNet is so, so very important. Because we're a community who share. And some of the digest stuff that's been published by the working groups over the last year is just so important. I couldn't have done that. I just couldn't have done that. But because it's there, I can access it. So what I would say is believe in what you're doing, do it because it's important, but never fall out of love with the idea that you're going to change the life of a child.
Hi, first of all, thank you. And I'm thinking, do you think one way to, because you were saying we need to improve the impact of our research to families and to improve their lives, do you think one way is to involve them more on our research? I'm thinking like participatory research, because sometimes it's not in a bad way, but sometimes it seems like we are using them as just participants and we have our aims and that's it. Do you think maybe one way is to involve them? Because what I feel is that sometimes they don't understand what they are doing and sometimes we have the dropouts and the engagement is not as much as we want. Do you agree that maybe we can involve them in the different ways, not just as
Absolutely. Absolutely I do. And I think it's really exciting when we do. Because all of a sudden we're giving parents and children a voice. We're giving them a real opportunity to shape policy and practice. And we're giving them credibility. Now, one of the things that's really dangerous about it is if we put a group of parents in a room, in a circle, because everybody sits in a circle, and we say, okay, so the research methodology that we're going to adopt today is, broadly speaking, what are you talking about? We have to make the language accessible to them, and we have to make sure that they understand what we're doing. And we don't patronize them. But if we are going to really access expert opinion, it's from families, it's from children. But the risk there, and the big risk is, As soon as you ask them, they'll tell you. And some of what they'll tell us won't be very welcome. And it's our responsibility to do something about it. Years and years and years ago, 30 more years ago, I did a research with a group of young people in a poor, needy area of a big city in the UK. And I said to them, what would you like in your area? And they said, we'd like a motorcycle track and a swimming pool. And I said, that's fair enough, but it's not going to happen. Because a swimming pool's too expensive and a motorcycle track's too noisy. And I went away. Next year, I went and asked them, they said, we'd like a motorcycle track, Andy, and we'd like a swimming pool. I said, you can't have a swimming pool because it's too expensive, and the motorcycle track's too noisy. I went back the third year. This is true. I'm very dim. And I said, what would you like? And they said, we're not going to talk to you. What's the point of talking to you? We've told you, and you've ignored us. So if we're going to engage with families and children, with parents and children, and we should, we have to act on what they're saying. And we have to take seriously what they're saying. So only go down that road if we're going to really engage with them as partners.
Thank you so much. It's so enthusiastic. I would just like to pose a question. What if we lived in a world where the political, because we're talking about the communication of political and policymakers, the political decisions were not taken always on the best interest of the child, and there were hidden agendas and conflictual ideas of what is best for the child. I'm joking also. I mean, how do we cope with the contradictories and the conflictual dynamic that exists in politics and policy making?
I'm being filmed here. You've been to the UK. You've just described sometimes what happens. Those of us that believe that children have rights, those of us that believe that families deserve the best that we can give them, those of us that believe that even young people who commit criminal offences have rights and have inherent value, okay? Those of us that believe those things must never lose sight of that. And that's why I've been doing this job for 40 years. Because somewhere inside of me, if you snap me in half, written right through me, is justice for children. And until I'm too old and too boring, which might be soon, to talk about this more, I will carry on doing it. We have to believe it. We have to see this not just as a career, but as a campaign. And we have to challenge, and we have to challenge intelligently. The law in the UK says that the Children Act 1989, the welfare of the child is the court's paramount consideration. And I constantly go back at that to politicians, to policymakers, to anybody, including my colleagues in the police, who are not the enemy. I've got some great police colleagues, and we sit around and talk about it. And let's be really clear, the police's job is to arrest criminals. That's what the state asks them to do. There's no problem with that. It's how we do it, how we treat the children when they have been arrested, what we're talking to the families about. We've got to get passionate. We've got to believe this, and we've got to join the campaign, the fun, which is international, European-wide, country-wide, city-wide, municipality-wide, street-wide passion for children and families and their welfare. Do I have to stop? You said till 4, didn't you?
I wasn't aware of the time.
Yes, one question.
I'll be very brief.
Oh,
I just wanted to also thank you, Anna, for being open about it. Sometimes I do wonder whether
yes.
I think we sometimes all have that hang up in the data, right? So I'm really glad you're saying, right, do work that matters, but indeed, probably the work you're doing matters.
Absolutely.
And I really like your suggestion, like, what do I do if I like start doubting? Well, talk to people about it, not
Absolutely.
I'm also slightly optimistic that we are moving in the academic community towards more appreciation for other output than just publications, right? So most of our universities will have signed the DOA agreement that research should no longer only assessed by publications and definitely not like number of publications because quality doesn't say anything about your impact. So I'm cautiously optimistic because of Andy and others leading the way that our universities are moving in that direction and giving us indeed this higher appreciation. And who knows, maybe a few years from now dissertations will have to include a policy statement. How would that look like? Envision that future.
Now you know you're talking. Absolutely. Yeah. But let me say now in the UK, I run once a month in the city of Leeds, we have an academic lecture. It's deliberately called an academic lecture. I contact, and my colleagues contact, academics from across the country and across the world. And we say, would you come and share your research? And they say, why should I? And I said, because I'm putting you in front of 120 social workers. And they say, yes, I'll come. And now it's online. Sometimes they come online, and sometimes they come in person. And the social workers love it. And the academics can go back to the university and said, I've just shared my research with 120 practitioners. And the university said, whoa, what does that mean? And then they have to get me to explain it. It can be done. We can do this, gang. Be brave. Be enthusiastic. I'll shut up, shall I? Thank you.